media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and we're going to be spending some time today talking about Idaho values, which it turns out Idaho values are whatever someone with a political wish list to fill out, they're whatever they tell us those values are. Got some great examples of this. But before I dive in, I want to just offer a word of caution, and this is true not just in politics, this is true in most things in life. If someone is trying to scam you, one of the ways that a con man will build confidence is to start referring to we and us. And hey, we make a pretty good team here, huh? We ought to work together on this. Can I get your bank account information? It's a very subtle way that they try to create rapport where there may not really be rapport. So with that in mind, let me lay a little bit of a headline on you, and then you can tell me if you feel like maybe there's a bit of con job going on here. This is from magicvalley.com. Inside Politics, this is an editorial. Reclaim Idaho embodies Idaho values. Now, this is written by the former director of communications for Reclaim Idaho. And there's a point in this commentary where it's very clear. Hey, look, we are Idaho values. We are your values. And it makes me think of the old adage of, the old guy driving down the road there with his buddy, and they pull up to a place where there's road construction going on, a bunch of guys standing around, leaning on their shovels, and a big sign that says men at work. The old coot turns to his friend and says, where I come from, we don't need a sign. We can tell just by looking at them. I would offer that same approach, or at least that same consideration. If somebody has to tell you how honest they are, if somebody has to tell you how upright and how good they are and how much their values reflect yours, that can be a pretty good indicator that the reason they're telling you is because they're worried you won't notice it on your own. Something to pay attention to. So let's dive into this commentary. Now, again, the former director of communications for Reclaim Idaho says, if you start an organization that embodies Idaho values, it helps to come up with a name that describes that goal and has the added value of being true. Okay, fair enough. Reclaim Idaho, the nonpartisan volunteer group responsible for getting Medicaid expansion, and now the Quality Education Act on the ballot, is just such an organization. Now, I'm not trying to be a wet blanket here, but I'm going to point out this individual is very excited that Reclaim Idaho has been successful at least once and possibly will be twice, depending on how voters, vote this coming November, in spending other people's money. I know it doesn't sound quite as lofty when you put it that way, but we'll break this down as to why this may not be quite the gift that Reclaim Idaho is trying to convince us that it is. So a little bit of background. The group sprang from humble origins in Sandpoint when three friends organized residents to get a local school bond passed. Buoyed by their success in that small North Idaho city, they decided to scale their effort on a statewide level. Their hundreds of volunteers took Idaho by storm in 2018 when they got Medicaid expansion on the ballot. The measure passed with an overwhelming 61% of the vote. All right, not exactly a landslide, guys. I mean, I appreciate this, but an overwhelming. Yes, you got your 50% plus a little bit of margin, but look at this. It received more votes than Idaho Governor Brad Little. What? People voted for free money over a politician? Wow, that's impressive. And in fact, based on the 2016 presidential election returns, Medicaid expansion was more popular than Donald Trump and just as popular as 2020 Trump. Again, that may seem really significant, but again, you're talking free money or the appearance of free money versus politicians. But look at this next line. Think on that for a second. It was so popular it got voted in. Reclaim Idaho, more like we are Idaho. All right, well, maybe some people in Idaho are really down with other people's money and spending other people's money, but that's something that I guess we debate and we work out and discuss and try to sort out to both in the legislature as well as at the ballot box. Far from being a one-hit wonder, Reclaim Idaho has woven itself into the fabric and values of our great state. Wait a minute. Really? They didn't already represent those values? They just kind of wove their way in? Is there any other analogy we could refer to? A tapeworm, for instance? How does it become a part of its host? They're back, and so are you, the Idaho voter. There's that. Here we are. We make a great team, don't we, Idaho voters? As long as you vote for what we're promoting, wow, there's nothing we can't do. Now, here's the interesting part, because this is the caution of, well, don't you pay attention to people who try to talk down this incredible gift we're trying to give the people of the state of Idaho, particularly the students, I believe it's implied, but listen to this. Between now and Election Day, you will hear a lot about the tax aspects of this initiative. If you're reading this right now, there's about a 96% chance the initiative will have no effect on you. So what, I'm poor? It's not going to affect me because I'm just too poor. You don't make enough money. It can't affect you. Actually, the Quality Education Act calls for modest tax increases on the income over $250,000 for individuals and over $500,000 for married couples. In other words, they're saying it does nothing to your taxes unless you make $250,001 or more as an individual, or $500,001 as a married couple or more. But even then, it points out, the tax only applies to the extra dollar over the threshold amounts. So if you're a small business owner with taxable income under those amounts, you will see no change. In other words, almost no small businesses in Idaho will be affected. Well, now we're talking about tens of millions of dollars. So somebody is going to have to pony up that money. Where do you suppose that's going to come from? If the assurance is, oh, don't worry, most of you aren't even going to be affected, does this mean then that this is going to really slam the people or the organizations or the companies that are achievers? Because I have some bad news for you. If you punish them for succeeding, if you punish them for actually making a profit, then you can expect to get less of that kind of behavior. It's a very simple formula. If you want to discourage something, you tax it. If you want to encourage it, you subsidize it. So if you want to discourage businesses from expanding their businesses, creating jobs, creating opportunities, creating, products or services that actually serve the market, yeah, just go ahead and hit them hard with taxes and it's all going to be good. But, the assurance here is that it's not going to be you. It's going to be them. So the thing I'm going to ask you to consider, and I realize, people are going to think you're just being a contrarian here, but if you are supportive of the idea, well, we ought to soak those other people, we ought to hit them hard because they can afford it, don't be surprised if you suddenly find yourself in a new tax bracket, because there are people below you that have that same mentality and are very anxious to see you being the one getting soaked because, you got to pay your fair share. Okay, at some point we need to be asking the question, is this necessary? Is it a proper function of government? For that matter, is this really even going to benefit these kids, or is this just going to try to prop up, the system itself and to keep the system funded as opposed to actually impacting the students in their education? We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Back to the article. The Quality Education Act should be called the Education Equality Act. Oh, it's got a nice little social justice ring to it. It will raise hundreds of millions of dollars every year so Idaho's children can get an education that allows them to compete with the rest of the nation, all while doing nothing to your income taxes and potentially easing your property tax burden. I mean, that almost sounds too good to be true. We can have our cake and we can eat it too, and the kids will get a great education and nobody really has to pay except, some of the really, really rich people. Okay. I think that this may be one of those times where we would benefit from having a second opinion. And I'm very grateful to Fred Birnbaum from the Idaho Freedom Foundation for providing, I think, a very well thought out second opinion on this. Fred says, Proposition 1, Reclaim Idaho's inappropriately named Quality Education Act, will be on the ballot this November. Originally intended to hike taxes on corporations, small businesses, and job creators, the proposal was supposed to hike taxes about $323 million. Well, here comes the other shoe crashing down. The proposal also reverses the tax cuts passed this year, which adds another $250 million to the total tax hike. So the 2022 tax cuts reduced rates for nearly everyone in the state, including poor and middle-class families. Yet they were opposed by Democrats. Go figure that. Final cost for Idahoans, if this clunker passes, is at least $570 million annually. Okay, that's a little bit higher than what we were told here. Now, Jared Walczak of the Tax Foundation recently noted that the measure would create an expanding tax bracket for the highest rate. So normally tax brackets rise with inflation so people don't fall into higher brackets over time. With this error, the bottom limit for the tax bracket, or the top bracket rather, will decrease as inflation rises over time, causing people with lower and lower incomes to qualify for the higher rate. Now, that's an error that can't be blamed on interpretation. And Fred goes on to say, let's look at the larger picture here. Did you realize this? Idaho recently closed the books on fiscal year 2022 and reported a whopping $1.381 billion surplus. That is the largest excess tax collection in state history. The state is awash in cash, which raises a question. And he's talking specifically about Marty Trillhays from the Lewiston Tribune, who avoids the question of, well, if the state has bags of cash laying around, why should voters be online to increase taxes? Trillhays apparently conveniently ducks the question because a massive tax hike makes 0 sense in this environment. And for example, he ignores massive increases in K through 12 spending during the past 2 years. The state appropriation is up 42% in the last 2 years, and that doesn't include funds from local sources like property taxes, bonds, and supplemental levies. But there's more. For the 2020-21 school year, the state appropriated $2.341 billion for K through 12 public schools. 2 years later, that figure jumped to $3.318 billion. So for those counting, that's about a $977 million K through 12 spending hike during the last 2 years. Now, Fred says it would be helpful if Trillhays and the rest of his friends in the media did a deeper dive into where that money went and ask questions about, so why aren't so many kids proficient in math, or why can't they read at grade level? And doesn't the public deserve an answer about the additional billion-dollar investment before adding hundreds of millions of dollars more? Furthermore, beyond that, Trillhays and his news media pals ought to review the finances of Idaho's school districts. This was fascinating too. It's a little known but wildly important fact that school districts have nearly $500 million in savings accounts. For example, the system-wide fund balance for the 2020-21 school year for maintenance and operations was $447 million, about 20% of expenditures for that year. 5 years ago, that amount was $226 million, or about 13% of expenditures for the 2015-2016 school year. So again, Fred Birnbaum asks, if schools are underfunded, why are districts growing reserve balances instead of using these resources for students? Trillhays might also want to take a look at funding by district per pupil and marvel at the huge variance in funding, and yet scratch his head when he found out that there was no correlation between spending and academic achievement. So again, it comes down to the idea. Is it necessary? Is it really something that needs to take place? Or is this something that is just, it's a wish list for people who want, more spending for education, not necessarily going for the students, but to bolster the system? I know the students are always held up as, but we're doing it for them. Won't somebody think of the children? I just would have to say I have serious doubts, especially if you're sitting on a state surplus right now, excess money that was taxed away from the citizens. Why again are you wanting to raise taxes? If these districts are sitting on nearly $500 million in savings, could that money be put to better use? Or wringing the taxpayers out, to get every drop out of them that we can? Is that the only way to go? Fred Birnbaum says Reclaim Idaho's proposal is no gift to Idahoans whose budgets and backs are buckling under the weight of record high inflation. It would be unwise to pass a $500 million tax increase in hopes the legislature might pass some form of tax cut to offset the Reclaim Idaho tax hike. He says the prudent path forward is for voters to reject Reclaim Idaho's tax hike on the poor, the middle class, and small businesses, and to push the legislature to adopt a bold tax relief package in 2023. Such a package would repeal the grocery tax, cut property taxes, and further reduce income tax rates. Now, that's a gift most Idahoans would love to receive. And I know it seems counterintuitive, unless you have actually looked at historically what happens when instead of trying to raise the tax rates, you actually cut taxes. The answer is, surprisingly, it increases tax revenues because more people, when it costs less to go out there and build a business or to take a chance and to create something of value, more people will do that when taxes are lower. And so as crazy as it sounds, well, if we would just tax them at a higher rate, we could make more money. Nope. tax them at a lower rate, and you will see more people actually step forward to do the things that create value and that can create money and create more revenue. I don't know why that doesn't compute, but maybe that's just a handicap for the people who must be in control at some level. Bottom line, you're going to be hearing a lot about this gift to the taxpayers, gift to Idaho students. Think carefully. And there's some terrific educational material about this particular tax hike, courtesy of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. If you haven't subscribed already, you really should check them out, idahofreedom.org. All right, let's talk about some fun and games. Politics, right? Yeah, I don't know if you've heard, but there's a lot of extremism that's going on in the state. And look at this headline. Longtime Republican joins Democrats' Idaho Attorney General campaign as co-chair. Well, I wonder what would bring them together on such an important thing. Longtime Idaho GOP Idaho Secretary of State Ben Isursa has never before publicly endorsed a Democrat against a Republican, but he did so on Tuesday. Isursa told the Idaho Press, "The rule of law is under attack," after endorsing Democratic nominee Tom Arkush for Idaho Attorney General against GOP nominee and former Idaho Congressman Raul Labrador. Isursa was one of 5 state campaign co-chairs Arkush announced Tuesday at a press conference. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, 1 independent. Now, afterward, Isursa said, "If Lawrence Wasden won the primary, you wouldn't see me here, obviously, nor Tom. It's a matter of what's best for the state." Now, before I go on here, let me just ask you to consider what would bring these politicians, ostensibly from different sides of the aisle, together in such a stunning show of bipartisanship. Now, if you were to say, well, maybe they're really concerned about, what Raul Labrador is going to do. I'm sure they are. But I'm also thinking that this illustrates perfectly that bipartisanship is nothing more than, hey, we circle the wagons when we feel that there is some kind of a credible threat to our power. And as you'll see in the article here, that's exactly the concern that they have. So Tony Park, who was a former Idaho Attorney General, said, "Folks, this election is about stopping extremism." Oh, he's on the bandwagon. That's what it's about. We cannot afford to play silly little games with the office of Attorney General. Now, he says, being a lifelong Republican, it's not easy to endorse a Democratic Attorney General candidate. But the rule of law is under constant attack, both at the national level and the state level. As a person who worked in elections for 40 years, I am especially chagrined by those who espouse the big lie. Former President Donald Trump's assertion that he actually defeated current President Joe Biden in the 2020 election, despite all evidence to the contrary. Well, you can call it the big lie all that you want, but even the people who question whether that election really was honest and transparent, they're not necessarily doing so because, well, we believe that, this is all about Trump and Trump should be the one sitting in the White House right now. It's a matter of the people who fought against Trump the whole time that he was in office, did everything they could to try to gin up stories of Russian collusion and oh, look, we've got to impeach him for this, we've got to impeach him for that. We're supposed to believe that these people set aside all of that enmity that they had for Trump all of this time and were good little boys and girls and behaved themselves and wouldn't do anything to try to monkey with the system. Sorry, I have not seen any evidence that would indicate that, oh yeah, we've definitively answered this question. In fact, all I have really heard from people like those who are saying it's the big lie is, shut up, you can't ask about that. You can't even think about that because we don't want people to doubt this process is legit. But here we are. And there are very good reasons for people to wonder if it's legit, especially when people are telling you, hey, you can't say that, you can't think that. Because to my thinking, when someone's saying you can't think that or you can't say that, that means we definitely need to be saying it. Why would they want to silence us? If the truth is on their side, would they not be willing to step up and show? I don't think that's happened. Now, Isursa says, make no mistake about it, this will be a very difficult race against a well-known and well-financed opponent. He said, but I sincerely believe Tom is up for the task, and I'm encouraged by his early fundraising totals. Idahoans deserve and expect in their attorney general a good lawyer, not a good politician. That's why I'm endorsing Tom Arkush as attorney general, along with all these other politicians that he called to be around him. So, just saying that, for someone who's not a politician, He's in pretty tight with the politicians, especially the ones who are worried that maybe someone is going to take a different approach than they have, which is whatever we say goes. I don't have time to go into, the places where Lawrence Wasden perhaps left something to be desired, but it's pretty clear, at least within GOP ranks, there are enough people who have recognized that the GOP has not been operating in their interest. Actually, the state government and in some cases local governments have not been operating in their interest, and they're putting their foot down. There's a reason why, the GOP leadership was swept clean and a fresh slate of new leadership was installed. And it's not because the extremists are winning. It's because people are tired of feeling that boot on the back of their neck. And this story just illustrates it doesn't matter whether it's a left boot or a right boot. The people who are wearing that boot really want to keep it there, and they're very threatened that something may upset their grasp on power. Now, the article goes on to say Arkush is a longtime Idaho attorney and former Gem County prosecutor making his first run for statewide office. He was long an independent before briefly registering as a Republican this year, then switching to Democrat before he was named the nominee for Attorney General. Flip-flop, flexible, I'll do whatever it takes. How many hoops do I have to jump through? Just let me have that power. And get the people who really want me to have that power to stand beside me and tell everybody what a great choice I am and what a serious attorney I am, as opposed to that politician, who is running. And from what I understand, Raul, Labrador is actually running on much more of a freedom platform. In other words, government is there to operate to keep you free as opposed to dictate every little detail of your life. That's a pretty big distinction. And I think it bears mentioning that, this is where you really don't see a lot of difference. Collectivism, whether it's Republican flavored or whether it's Democratic flavored, is still a very distasteful thing to people who wish to be free. We've experienced enough lack of freedom in the last couple of years. I, for one, really wouldn't want to go down that road. So I'm happy to see that we have some choices. But look at the establishment, closing ranks, circling the wagons. Ooh, they don't like this. This is very threatening. And this is why they dust off labels like extremist, to try to convince people, oh, you don't really want that. You need the firm hand of our leadership telling you the way that things are and, making sure that you know exactly what you're supposed to do at every given time, as opposed to we're going to mostly stay out of your way, but we're here to bring the law to bear in a protective function as opposed to a preventive function. Only one of those approaches is actually conducive to liberty. All right, I'm going to shift gears here one more time. I just have to bring this one up just because I'm so enthralled by the ferocity with which, first of all, this investigative reporter for Idaho Capital Sun is going after this Dr. Ryan Cole, who we are assured is spreading misinformation, has been knowingly spreading misinformation, blah, blah, blah. I mean, this is like her job. Get him. You've got to find a way to smear him. And her job just got tougher because the CDC just came out this week and changed a lot of the guidelines. So the science has changed. Oh, my word. So a lot of the things that, this doctor is being criticized over, now suddenly, oh, my word, the authority, the science, just in time for the midterms, seems to has suddenly shifted. You ready for this? All right. Dr. Ryan Cole's journey from Boise to Nashville to France. His new focus, monkeypox. But look at that subheadline. Idaho pathologist went on the road spreading misinformation about COVID-19 over the past year. Now, as an added bonus for you, I'm going to add a very special disclaimer that will help each of these headlines and each of these statements about misinformation and disinformation and these debunked ideas. And that is simply this. Here's the disclaimer. Idaho pathologist went on the road spreading misinformation about COVID-19 over the past year, according to the regime. It's important because this is who this reporter is trying to speak for, is the regime. She's one of their enforcers, I guess, trying to keep us on the narrative. State lawmakers in Tennessee were considering a bill to put natural immunity, in quotation marks, because we know that's not a real thing, on equal footing with vaccinated immunity for COVID-19. Healthcare workers and anyone else required to have COVID-19 vaccination for work or school could be exempt from vaccines as long as they'd already been infected with the coronavirus and recovered. That week in early March, Idaho pathologist Dr. Ryan Cole spoke to members of the Tennessee House and Senate. It was at least his fourth trip to Nashville since August 2021 to make unfounded claims, according to the regime, to legislators and the public. Very important. You must not believe what this man says because his claims have been unfounded. Although I'm going to show you, though, here in a minute that this idea that natural immunity has no standing, I'm sorry, but this investigative reporter is going to have to eat her words with both hands when she sees what the CDC released just a couple of days ago. Brandishing his credentials as a pathologist and now as a member of the Central District Health Public Health Board, Cole became a fixture on the national and international speaking circuit for COVID-19 skeptics and deniers, according to the regime. Whatever happened to the idea that maybe he was just questioning the narrative? You know, what's wrong with there being a dissenting point of view? I mean, it's pretty obvious to me that Dr. Ryan Cole is not the only medical doctor out there who has asked serious questions about this. I look at the signers of the Great Barrington Declaration. I look at Dr. John Ioannidis. I look at Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Robert Malone. There's a host of other physicians out there, none of whom are sitting there trying to say my way is the only way, but simply saying there are serious questions here that need to be considered. And the more that the official version is hammered down upon us, and you can't talk about anything but this, and the fact checkers, of course, are trying to tell us, you know, you have to adhere strictly to the narrative that we are given. Nope, we need second opinions. We need to understand that the medical science is not about we're all in perfect agreement and nobody can dissent here. I mean, for crying out loud, Governor Little, in very, very early on during the lockdowns in 2020, actually banned things like ivermectin as a potential treatment. That's between you and your doctor. You know, to sit there and just, you can say it's unfounded, but there were people who found that, no, this actually worked very well. I've seen it myself. Now, I know that's anecdotal, but isn't that something you'd rather work out with your doctor? Or do we really need that whole collectivist, centralized, one-size-fits-all approach where nobody can think for themselves? Going back to the article here, Cole's first speaking engagements in Tennessee were in June 2021 when he visited Memphis, Nashville, and Chattanooga over 3 days. He was a guest speaker with America's Frontline Doctors, according to a resume he submitted with his application for the Central District Health Public Health Board. Here we go again. America's Frontline Doctors is an organization that makes unfounded claims about COVID-19 and vaccines and makes money from peddling bogus treatments, according to reports from The Intercept and Time. So, unfounded claims about COVID-19, according to the regime, and makes money from peddling bogus treatments, according to a couple of our media friends at The Intercept and Time magazine who happen to agree with us. Now, look, they're entitled to their opinions. But can we at least be honest enough to say that's what these are? These are opinions. And there is not a corner on the market of truth, and there's not just one true way that we must do this, otherwise be burned at the stake as heretics. And if you want to see some living proof of what that looks like, well, just feast your eyes on this. Here's the new COVID-19 guidance from the CDC focusing on individual decisions. Let's see. Those exposed to the virus are no longer required to quarantine. Here's a big one. Unvaccinated people now have the same guidance as vaccinated people. Students can stay in class after being exposed to the virus. It's no longer recommended to screen those without symptoms. Well, what the heck? So the unvaccinated are on the same standing as the vaccinated in the eyes of the CDC. I mean, for crying out loud. It only took him 2.5 years to get to the point where we could acknowledge the reality that, yeah, this thing is going to play out like most viruses do. It's going to make its way through the population. It's going to be endemic. And the thing to do, and this is what the signers of the Great Barrington Declaration advocated, was you use targeted protection. Look at who the most vulnerable people are and focus your protection on them. And by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean government interventions and lockdowns. It's just that's where the effort is placed to protect people who need to be protected. What do you do with everybody else? You leave them the hell alone. That's what you do. And that's how it was done in previous pandemics. And you know what? It works out. I guess the bottom line is, COVID may have posed a health risk and does pose a health risk to some people. but it poses a much larger risk in terms of the amount of government overreach and the amount of just sheer lust to control others that we witnessed at every level, federal right on down to local. So when you hear that people dismiss, oh, they're COVID deniers, or they're COVID skeptics, or they're anti-vaxxers, or whatever, mixed in there, you're going to find people who know what their rights are, who are willing to claim them, use them, and defend them, and who see very clearly when someone is trying to usurp power for the purpose of exerting control that not only is unnecessary, but is actually very harmful in terms of the long-term effects on liberty. So if you don't like it, that's fine. You don't have to agree. But I think in interest of clarity, you need to know that's what you're up against. People who take their freedom seriously, people who don't want to go out there and impose their worldview on everybody else. That's you. That's the Karens who think that, well, it all has to come from some place of authority or it's not legit. We want to be left alone. And if you can't leave us alone, well, don't be surprised if you get some pushback and maybe even get called out on your efforts to tell us, what we must do, what we must think, what we must say. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well,